Welcome to another episode of Estate Planning Nightmares and How to Avoid Them. This is the show that highlights the importance of estate planning and why everyone needs to do it. And of course, the unfortunate consequences of what happens far too often if people have not planned. I'm your host, John Braddock, author of the Amazon bestseller, Click Here When I Die, and the founder of My Life and Wishes, the Legacy Vault, an online planning and document storage solution created specifically to make things easier for those you love. Say, today we have another exciting episode for you. I'm thrilled to introduce my friend, Valerie Pasion. Valerie is an attorney specializing in estate planning. She currently lives in Orange County with her husband, Roland, who also happens to be her high school sweetheart. Together, they have 4 children, ages 6, 10, 13, and 14. Wow, busy. Valerie graduated Summa Cum Laude from UCLA in 2005. And in 2019, she received her JD from the UCLA School of Law. Hey, go Bruins! Valerie is currently with the Asset Protection and Elder Law Center in Irvine, California, in which she considers this to be her second family. And I always ask people, what do you do in your free time? And so in her free time, she really, wait a minute. Let's get real here, right? Valerie, you don't have any free time.
Nope.
Welcome, Valerie. So happy to have you join us today.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I just so enjoy talking with good friends and attorneys across the country and trying to open people's eyes. So I love talking about passion, and not necessarily you, because it's your last name, right? But passion in the why, behind why people do what it is they do. I think it's a great way for our audience to really get to know our guests. So can you share your why? I mean, why estate planning over all the other practice areas in law?
So as you mentioned earlier, I am a mom of 4. And as cliche as it sounds, family is my why. I often joke that I married my husband for his last name, but passion is in our genes. And for me, estate planning is one of those industries that is all about the family. I actually used to practice in other areas of law, and there's a running joke in the lawyer community that, lawyers, we work with good people at their worst. However, I feel very blessed because in estate planning, I get to work with good people at their best. I work with people who have worked hard, built a family, maybe started a business, maybe saved enough to have a good nest egg. Now their goal in life is just to make sure that they're passing it down and ensuring that their legacy is done right.
Oh, absolutely. That's so great. Yeah, I know. I mean, the thing about estate planning that I love, it's a very proactive form of law, right? I mean, all the other forms of law, well, most of the other forms of law tend to be reactive, right?
Yeah,
Trying to
absolutely.
solve a problem later.
Absolutely. And that's what I like about it. I mean, the reality is about 90% of our population needs some sort of estate planning. The truth is only about 30% have any sort of planning at all. And within that 30%, a lot of it is insufficient planning. And when I say insufficient, I mean, maybe they tried doing it themselves. Maybe they used an attorney that really just specializes in immigration law. Whatever the reason, something falls through the cracks and it's not sufficient. And the unfortunate part about this area is that you don't oftentimes know that things aren't done right until it's a little too late. That's those that actually planned, but the majority of us don't have any planning at all. And the real reason is nobody wants to think about this. No one wants to think about death. No one wants to think about incapacitation. I mean, let's be real. People are more excited to think about where their next vacation is or, what they're eating this evening. And the reality is those things are just not as important as a proper estate plan.
You're so spot on with that because, you know, the thing is, as human beings, right, we're planners by nature. It's like you say, we plan what we're going to have for dinner tonight, and I have to stop at the grocery store, and I have to plan what's the best route where I'm going to have less traffic, right? And we plan our vacation, and we plan for our wedding and our honeymoon, and our kids going off to college. But the one thing we fail to plan for is the one thing that's absolutely going to happen. It's death. And you're right. People don't like to talk about it because, obviously if we don't talk about it, it won't ever happen. Right. Not true. But what's so funny is that when I first got involved in the world of helping people protect their things and pass them to family and make life easier, when I talk to people, I'd say, do you have an estate plan? Right. And their response so often was, I don't need an estate plan. That's for like rich people and stuff. And my response always was, look, estate is just a really fancy word for stuff. And we all have stuff. And believe it or not, your family's going to fight over your stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's important to get it planned.
That actually brings a very good point, is that oftentimes people think that estate planning is only for those that are wealthy, or only for those that are, at their end of their life. That couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I often like to argue that, the less you have, the more you need to plan, because you can't afford to not plan, because the cost of not planning will far outweigh the cost of just doing a good job from the very beginning. And in fact, that reminds me of a very, very interesting story that actually one of the reasons why I fell into this industry was, I did some pro bono work for my church a while back, and I was in their legal ministry department, and I used to kind of help guide people through family law issues, because previously I was a family attorney as well, family law attorney as well. And I remember a homeless man came in and he asked me, he said, Val, can you help me do estate planning? And, I looked at the guy, and in my head, I was thinking, well, what could he have possibly needed estate planning for? This was just my lack of judgment and just being very naive to estate planning in general. So I said, well, I don't really do estate planning, but, tell me, what are your needs? And he said, well, I don't have very much, Val. In fact, I just have a storage unit. But in my storage unit, I've collected all the things that I've loved in my life. Things like some porcelain statues and just some sentimental tokens that he's just gathered. And he said, in my life, there's been so many people that have helped me, including, some pastors of the church, or, people that I have met along my life, that I want them to know that I appreciate them, and I would like to give these things to those people. And I remember looking at him and thinking, wow, to most people's eyes, this man didn't have very much, but in his eyes, this was his world. And the thought of not being able to pass it along just tore him apart. So I was very moved and very touched by this. And I remember going down on a deep dive and learning more about estate planning. I was a very young attorney at the time, so, I didn't quite understand or have a good grasp of it. And I realized, after looking through everything, that all he needed was a simple will. So I remember drafting it for him, bringing it to him, making sure that the witnesses were there, making sure that things got executed properly. And when I finished, I remember his eyes were filled with tears, and he was very elated. And I remember him giving me a hug and saying, thanks, Val. Now I know that I can leave and feel peace. I didn't tell you this, but I am sick. And at that moment, I just remember thinking to myself, wow, I think this is my calling. This is what I should be doing.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and that's just it. So many people say, I know I personally, when we did our estate planning, which should have been done years before we actually did it, but the peace of mind, the sense of, okay, I can now relax because, things are things are going to be in a place and be done how I want them. And then of course I know I have to continue to, it's not a set it and forget it either, because life circumstances changes, but certainly keeping up to date. But the sense of that calm and that peace of mind,
Yes,
it's hard to put a price tag on that, really.
it is. It is. I often joke that, when a client leaves my office, they feel peace. And, in other areas of law, you tend to walk out the door and feel a little anxious. So, like I said, I'm very blessed to be doing what I'm doing. People tend to have a good, positive reaction when they're in front of me. And I mean, I can't ask for anything else, anything better.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a good story. I like that. We call the show Estate Planning Nightmares. And, I find the best way to get people thinking about their own planning is through real stories, not necessarily to scare them, right? But to get them to understand the realities of what may happen without some planning, even if it's simple planning. So, do you have any nightmare?
Oh boy. So, like I said, majority of my clients, wonderful stories, but I wouldn't be telling the truth if I didn't have some nightmare stories. And I have a lot of nightmare stories, but one in particular really stands out. As you had mentioned, I'm a mom of 4, and so it's a pretty big family. And I remember dealing with another family that was similar to mine. Only this family was probably 10, 20 years ahead of where we are at. And I got a call. It was from one of the children. It was a family of 6. And he had mentioned to me that they've been really struggling and their mom really wanted to get some estate planning done. They asked if I could go to the house and kind of help them shuffle through things because the mom was completely overwhelmed. And generally, I don't really do house calls, but it was a friend of a friend. And I just felt like, all right, I want to, help them. So I remember going to the house. It was quite a beautiful house. And in there, walking in, I see the mom and all of the children just standing in front of me with very solemn faces. And I began to sit down and proceed and started to ask them some questions. In the middle of the questions, excuse my language, but all hell just sort of broke loose. And they were fighting with each other. There was a lot of screaming, yelling. And it turns out that one of the sons had convinced the mom to transfer the house into his name with the note that this was part of estate planning, that it would avoid probate if they transferred it. Little did they know that son had a list of debts that were going to be attached to the house, not to mention he then refused to sign any quitclaim deed relinquishing it back to the mom so that she could do a proper estate planning and transfer it all to the kids. His response was just, it's in my name now, so it belongs to me. Can you imagine how absolutely livid the family was? Not to say that things could not have been done to reverse the situation, but being in the middle of what I'd like to call World War III was not very pleasant for me. So I remember just getting out of the house as quick as possible and said to the mom, I appreciate all this, but please give me a call when you're ready. And it was just unfortunate. I mean, I remember driving away thinking to myself, this is what happens when you don't preemptively plan with the professional. When you take the planning in your own hands, sometimes you do things and the results are not what you intended it to be.
That's really amazing. So I often hear people say, oh, death is a time that brings families closer together. And I argue that and say, I think it can be one of the most divisive times in lives. I've spoken with people who have not spoken with a sibling for 10 years. since a family member died because of situations like that, where you have one son that or daughter that convinces mom or dad to put the house in my name. And now the rest of the family is, which is not what mom and dad would have wanted at the end of the day. So I have to ask the question: was mom elderly? Was she in the right state of mind? Could it be contested?
Here's the sad part. So mom was fully aware what was going on. She was right there during the argument. I mean, they were arguing in front of her as if she was already in the coffin. That was the sad part. And I just remember her face was just utterly confused and in shock that all this was happening and transpiring right in front of her eyes. Yes, you're right. Oftentimes the arguments start coming once someone has passed, but with improper planning, that those quarrels and those arguments and those bitter feuds start way before one even passes. So having a good attorney that not only helps you plan for your journey, but guides you throughout your lifetime, I mean, that's invaluable.
Absolutely. And I don't know, where you are in California, where I am in Scottsdale, Arizona, or different parts of the country where our listeners are. But for the most part, my understanding is a basic estate plan. I mean, a will is a will, and a will guides, the courts to distribute the assets the way you want them, right? But there's still probate. The trust can avoid the probate and pass the assets a lot quicker to the family. But it's kind of like, am I willing to invest, call it $3,000 to have a proper estate plan put in place? Or do I want my children to spend $20,000 or more,
tens of thousands of dollars in probate court?
And a couple of years. I was on one of my previous podcasts, I was interviewing an attorney in New York City, and she was telling me that it takes 2 years to get on the docket for probate up there.
It's crazy, John. We're probate attorneys as well, so we are quite familiar with the probate process. It used to be that we could get through a case in about a year. Now more and more it's about 1.5 to 2 years, and that's if you have a good attorney representing you. I actually have a friend of mine who's in his 4th year of probate because he tried figuring it out on his own and filed in the wrong jurisdiction, filed the wrong forms, and then he finally came to me and asked for our help. And he's a friend of mine, and I just looked at him and said, "Why didn't you come to me sooner?"
Right. And so often too, and I think people don't think this through with their own planning, and they have kids. So they've got some money, right? But they haven't done any planning. And many times, maybe one of the children might be, not very financially well off, and thinking, oh, well, now mom just died, right? And so now at least I'm going to, get some money and maybe be able to, get my own house out of foreclosure or something, right? It's like, not going to happen that easy, because, it's going to be 1.5 years before you see any of that money.
Yeah. So you're right. It's a common misconception out there. People think, oh, I have a will, I'm good. But oftentimes in most states, a will is not sufficient. And probate, it's different from state to state, but for the most part, probate is such a complex, time-sensitive process. And people often think that, wow, once probate opens, it's going to be pretty quick. Most states, it's not that way. It's not only a lengthy process, but it's a complicated process. And there's a lot involved. And if you don't do it correctly, you may be stuck there even longer than expected. So definitely making sure that you have sufficient planning. That's number one. Not quite sure about Arizona, but California probate, most people don't even wish their worst enemy going through something like that.
Oh boy, I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, that's neat. I mean, those are great stories. I love the story about the homeless man, and really getting that peace of mind. So sad about the other family with scenarios like that. But again, just to our listeners, I mean, these are the things that happen. Valerie has 4 children. I have 6 children. Children fight. We're growing up. Children can't agree. We can't agree where to go to dinner, what movie to watch, and on and on and on. So if we mistakenly believe that if we don't have a plan and our children are going to agree on things, never going to happen. Never going to happen. And the last thing I would want is to know that after my death, that my children were fighting like they used to when they were kids. And it's so easy to avoid.
You're absolutely right, John. I mean, at the
So
end of the day, the best thing we could really give to our loved ones is proper planning to not only avoid the costs, the time, and the stress, but to really keep their relationship intact.
exactly. So as we're winding up on our time, I wanted to ask, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience, or is there a question that maybe I didn't ask you that you're like, man, I wish you asked me that question?
No, the only thing else I'd like to share is one, not only making sure that, you get some proper estate planning in place. And like I said, it's not a one size fits all scenario. Talking to someone who is competent, someone that you trust is going to be very important. But I would even add that, when you are looking for someone who's helping you plan your estate, look for someone who's willing to provide lifetime guidance for you. Oftentimes I say at the end of the day, it's not just a set of documents. I mean, the documents are great, but life happens, things change. Making sure you have an attorney that you trust to be by your side for your life, I mean, that's more valuable than anything else.
Absolutely. And that attorney will then, at the end of your life, be invaluable to your family members.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So this has been great. How could our listeners reach you if they have questions in general?
Well, first off, they can always reach me out direct. My email is passion with 1 S at pslawyers.com. Our website is www.assetprotectioncenter.com. So they can always reach out to us through there as well. And our number here is 714-966-2646.
Awesome. Asset Protection and Elder Law Center, Valerie Pasion, who's passionate about helping.
Passionate.
Very passionate. And so I can't thank you enough for being on our show today. It's been insightful, and I, along with our listeners, are truly grateful for your time. And a big thanks to all of you, our listeners. Feel free to reach out to Valerie. I will include all of her contact information in the show notes. So until next time, my friends, plan ahead and make it a great day.